Joe Biden made his Supreme Court pick, and I'm surprised, man. It's a shockingly decent Supreme Court pick. Now, not everything is not perfect, but it's honestly better than I would have expected and as good as I can imagine given the state of our rotten politics. So let me give you some information on her here. New York Times says, as a public defender, Supreme Court nominee helped clients others avoided. Ambitious lawyers usually become prosecutors. Ketanji Brown Jackson worked on behalf of criminal defendants and Guantanamo detainees. After the Supreme Court's landmark 2004 ruling that Guantanamo Bay prisoners could file lawsuits challenging their indefinite detention, the federal public defender in the District Court of Columbia took on several such cases and assigned a young lawyer in his office to handle them. Ketanji Brown Jackson. Quote, they involved very complex legal issues that were just being worked out, and it needed someone who was incredibly bright and an incredibly good lawyer, recalled the public defender A.J. Kramer. Quote, we thought Ketanji was the best fit. Ms. Jackson, who went on to become a federal trial judge and then an appeals court judge, is now President Biden's Supreme Court nominee. But her 2.5 years as an assistant public defender, including her work on behalf of accused terrorists and of criminal defendants, is likely to receive particular scrutiny under the glare of her coming confirmation fights. We're going to get to more on that in a second. Lawyers who harbor ambitions to be a judge, as she clearly did, having written in her high school yearbook that a judgeship was her goal, typically serve as prosecutors who help put criminals in prison. If confirmed, Judge Jackson would be the modern court's first justice with experience as a public defender. She has also had to navigate the politics of having represented unpopular clients. At her confirmation to be a district court judge in 2012, for example, Senator Charles E. Grassley, Republican of Iowa, challenged her about Guantanamo work, saying her record raised some concern about how you will handle terrorism cases that may come before you. Okay, so I should point out that for previous positions she was in, she was approved with even, I believe, 3 Republican votes. Her resume in terms of, how much experience she has is ironclad. Ironclad. So let me read you some more. They go on in the New York Times piece. They say, Judge Jackson has deep roots in thinking about criminal law from multiple perspectives. One of her uncles was sentenced to life in prison on cocaine charges, but another was Miami's chief of police. A third uncle was a sex crimes detective. As an undergraduate at Harvard, she wrote a senior thesis in 1992 titled The Hand of Oppression, Plea Bargaining Processes, and the Coercion of Criminal Defendants. That's a super important issue, and it happens all the time. You coerce criminal defendants into pleading guilty when they're not guilty, and then they end up cutting plea deals with them and locking them up because they tell them if this thing goes to trial, you're going to go down even though you're innocent. She knows that problem. She wrote about that problem, and highly unlikely I thought I'd ever see somebody that maybe gets on the Supreme Court who understands the nuances and the complexities and that important perspective. After graduating from Harvard Law School, clerking for several judges, including Justice Stephen Breyer, the man she would succeed, she also won an appeals court ruling overturning the conviction of a former lawyer who had been convicted of tax evasion related to taking a Mercedes-Benz 500 SL the mother of a drug-dealing client had given him as a retainer. The case turned on a complex dispute over the production of papers that the court ruled violated his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. So that I told you not everything's perfect. She did, some characters who she defended were suspect at best, but there's a reason why she's in that field, because this is an important point that authoritarians overlook. Due process matters massively. And you can't just give the state leeway, whatever they say goes. You don't need any process in place because it's what's the old saying? It's much better to let one guilty person go or to let 100 guilty people go than have one innocent person locked up. And actually following the process and making sure the law is applied objectively and fairly and representing people who might be otherwise contemptuous, it's one of the most amazing parts of having a criminal justice system that truly is fair. Like, even the worst of the worst get their day in court. And that's the way it should be. Now, unfortunately, it hasn't been like that for a while. And for a long time at Guantanamo, it's like, look, no due process, no habeas corpus. We're just going to lock you up and throw away the key. And the argument is, these aren't citizens. The Constitution doesn't apply to them. They're enemy combatants. And so none of the rules apply. And Ketanji Brown Jackson, or Jackson Brown, excuse me, I'm fucking up her name here, which is a shame, but she definitely does not believe that. And she 100% is in the right on that issue, on the proper side of that issue. By the way, another thing she was involved in is reducing sentences for drug crimes. So she was very critical of, remember the disparity when it came to crack cocaine versus cocaine? And it really is just totally racially motivated. Black people, by and large, did crack, and white people, by and large, did cocaine. And so you get way more time for crack cocaine than cocaine. She was involved in reducing sentences for drug crimes. Now, to go back to what they're going to hit her with, of course, they're going to hit her with, like, you defended terrorists. Look, guys, I don't know the specific cases of the specific people that she defended, but the fact of the matter is, and you know this if you've watched this show for a long time, the overwhelming majority of the people who were locked up at Guantanamo Bay were totally innocent. What happened was the Bush administration cut a deal with warlords in Afghanistan and Pakistan and told them, hey guys, we just got hit on 9/11 here. You got to send us terrorists if you know where they are. And so you had the government of Pakistan just like, and warlords just round up people who were their political enemies and ship them to the U.S., and they were locked up in Guantanamo with no due process whatsoever. And so it turns out warlords in Pakistan are not the most trustworthy people. And it came out over time that most of the people we were locking up at Guantanamo didn't do anything wrong. Weren't affiliated with Al-Qaeda or jihadism, didn't attack us on 9/11. And we know the story of a whole bunch of them. I mean, we covered the story of Murat Kurnaz very famously a long time ago. Murat Kurnaz is a German citizen who was shipped to Guantanamo. And eventually Germany had to intervene and say, look, this guy's not a terrorist. You got to let him go. He was a German citizen who was like in Pakistan or Afghanistan. He was rounded up. And so this is why due process matters. This is why it's so important, because you can't just trust the government to say, I think this person's guilty, so you got to lock him up. It's like, no, there needs to be a process where evidence is presented and all the facts are out there, and you can make a reasonable decision based on that. And so for her to be a criminal, a criminal defendant, or criminal, why am I blanking on this word? For her to defend criminals, and for her to defend accused terrorists, it shows that she believes in that system, and she believes in accountability, and she believes in justice. And look, if at the end of the day these people are guilty and they get locked up, sure, it is what it is, but everyone needs to have their day in court. And my guess is a lot of the people she defended actually didn't do anything wrong. And so she played a very pivotal and important role. So massive credit here to Biden, surprisingly, for picking the least bad option. Because there was another option that was on the table that was being pushed by James Clyburn, who was just a rank corporatist who is exactly what the Republicans would have wanted. And in fact, some Republicans did come out and argue for Clyburn's pick. But Biden did not go in that direction. So people are going to make a big stink about, well, look, it's historic. It's the first black woman on the court, which is great. But the more important point is her record. The more important point is her judicial philosophy. And it seems to me that she's going to adjudicate in a way that is much more in alignment with my philosophy and my values than, any of the other potential options would have done. Ever since Adpocalypse, when YouTube defunded all independent news and politics overnight, we haven't trusted them. We know they can pull the rug out from underneath us at any time. If you enjoy this content, please consider tipping $1 or $2 per month on the Secular Talk Patreon. Link in the video description box below. Thanks for your support.